White House. I think, I saw it in the Annapolis conference of 2007 when President Bush came out and said, all right, I'm making a push for peace. This was essentially a few months after Hamas sacked the Gaza Strip. I don't know where that came from, personally. I mean, I supported the way that the president backed Israel from a defense perspective all the way along, and then I watched that last year happen, and it was like a train wreck. I just didn't understand it, and now I'm watching, I would say, an extension of that train wreck now, where we're saying, hey, let's push for that two-state solution again, and it's like, are you not reading the news? That, everything that I have in here is open source. I look at Al Jazeera, I look at Sharq al-Awsat, I look at Palestinian news sources, and it's all out there in the open. This isn't even talking about intelligence, which I know they're getting to on these issues. So the question is, why? Why are we still talking about things as if this conflict doesn't exist? And I don't have the answer other than the fact that this is something that the Palestinians see as a black eye. They don't want this to come out. They don't want people to know that they are ultimately getting in the way of their own future. Because they are. I mean, isn't it much easier as a Palestinian to say, you know what, the occupiers over there, they have these checkpoints and I'm humiliated and I can't live the way I want to live. That's the Palestinian narrative, right? Well, how about my narrative? The Palestinians need to stop killing each other to figure out who leads them, and then can maybe get back to the negotiating table and figure out if they're going to make peace with Israel. That's my narrative. And that is not a popular narrative. It's not terribly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but I think the truth hurts. And ultimately, I think we need to have a State Department that's able to articulate that to the Palestinians. It's tough love. Ultimately, this will benefit everybody. If we start to say, listen guys, let's start working with what we really have on the ground, as opposed to, we're chasing our tail right now. Sending George Mitchell back and forth to Jerusalem and to Ramallah and to wherever else, and all we're doing is burning fuel and wasting a ton of taxpayer money and not getting anywhere because we still don't know who we're supposed to work with. And that it's maddening. It's a very simple concept here, but it's just not one that I think most people are willing to embrace. Yes, sir.
That new quote, police force that's being trained, several battalions being trained by the United States. A, are they going to be reliable? B, will they just be additional thugs? Or C, the cadre of a Palestinian army?
It's a very good question, and I wish I had all the answers for you. This new force that's being stood up by General Keith Dayton initially was apparently a disaster, has now been trained and is looking like a more professional military force, and the U.S. Officials in charge of it seem quite pleased with what they're seeing. My argument is that we've seen this movie before and it didn't end well. We, the United States, provided the Palestinian Authority police with a ton of training and weaponry and everything else during the 1990s, during the Oslo days. And ultimately, those M16s that we provided and those weapons first were turned against Israel during the Intifada of 2000, and then were captured by Hamas in 2007 when they sacked the Palestinian Authority buildings. And the Palestinian Hamas movement taunted the United States by saying, look at the weaponry that we have that you gave them that's now in our hands. So I've got questions about why we're doing this, but at the same time I understand that the alternative is Hamas. So what we're trying to do, as I understand it, is to make the best out of what is admittedly a terrible situation and to try to make it so that the Fatah faction does not fall to Hamas in the West Bank the way that it did in the Gaza Strip. That's the policy behind it, but it's certainly flawed. There's no way around it. And then there are also questions about loyalty. In other words, can you have a military force, an army, that is loyal to the Palestinians, when we don't even know what the Palestinians are right now, but they're loyal to the Palestinian people and they serve under one Palestinian flag, when Palestinian politics, everything is dominated by clan, family, and tribe today. That is the basis of Palestinian society, and then on top of that you've got these two factions which buy off these clans, families, and tribes. So I don't know how this is all going to work. I hope it doesn't end like the last time, because those two scenarios that I painted for you were not good for, one led to a ton of Israeli lives being lost, that was in 2000, and then you had, several hundred Palestinian lives lost in 2007. So it didn't end well either time with the weapons that were provided by the U.S. So, but as we say in Hebrew, your geshem is as good as mayim. I have no idea how this one is going to play out. Yes, in the back.
I was wondering, you mentioned that we tend to hear kind of the narrative where it's the enemy of the Palestinians is the Israelis, not so much of the infighting. But I'm wondering how much you feel the media has to do with that, because in my opinion, I feel that Palestinians tend to have a public relations problem in the sense that if, God forbid, a suicide bomber gets through and kills some Jewish people in Tel Aviv or Dimona or whatever, that makes international headlines.
Right.
But what we don't tend to hear about is the kitchen table conversations of everyday Palestinians as infuriated as all of us are in this room by what's going on. I mean, I spent 2 weeks in Ramallah and Jericho and Nablus in October, and I can tell you firsthand.
Club Med?
Not quite. I was at the Best Eastern Hotel, which we lovingly renamed the Worst Western. But all kidding aside, I had some very fascinating conversations with Palestinians who I can tell you are as against the suicide bombings as everyone in this room, as pro the two-state solution as a lot of Jewish people are, Americans, a lot of other people, and are extremely frustrated with their own government.
Yeah.
And many people said to me, we feel that if the politicians kind of stepped aside and business people were running the show, that we would have had a solution a long time ago. And many of them are very disappointed with Abbas. They would tell me that they feel he's working out for like middle management, but not a leader. So I just want to
Let me try to take it clear.
I feel that it's important for us to recognize it's really nuanced, and that if you put a bunch of Americans in a room, we'd be divided on some love Obama, some hate Obama, some hated Bush, some love Bush. Same thing with the Palestinian community. I felt it's extremely divided within them, and I think it's important for this conversation to bear in mind is not the Palestinians, kind of as you began the conversation, the whole notion of your book, you have Fatah and Hamas, and I think we have to trickle that down to the people, because at the people level, I sensed a huge amount of frustration within them, and many of them really would like a peaceful solution.